Two, one. Hey, everybody, welcome to our weekly Data Talk, a show where we talk with academics, data scientists from around the world. And friends, super excited today because we're talking to Dr. Scott Page about his new book, The Model Thinker. And by the way, Dr. Page, I was up at 3 a.m. this morning, super excited to chat with you about models, which is something I normally would not do. Because when I was an English lit major in college, and I gravitated toward the humanities all the way through grad school. So mathematics, economics was not my cup of tea. I ran away. And so when I first got your book, my first reaction as an English major was when I started seeing diagrams and mathematical formulas, I said, what did I get myself into? And so I actually passed it around to a bunch of different friends, my wife, and we were talking about your book. And I have to tell you that the concepts, because the math I didn't understand, but the concepts,
boxes,
the concepts, like for me, helped me think about things in a different way. It put into words things I could never articulate myself. And you made really complex things like these models and mathematical models, like easier to understand because you're a very good storyteller. And I think that's why I gravitated towards English lit, because I love stories. And someone who could take like math and like these, for me, very complex topics and bring them down to someone like me is you have a great skill.
Thank you.
So the first thing I was like, from reading your book, I was like, okay, I wasn't even aware of all these different types of models that are out there. I had heard of like financial models. I mean, I work for Experian, so we have lots of credit score models, right, that help determine and predict risk. Like, am I going to pay back this car loan? So I was familiar with the concept of like mathematical models, and you point out like economic models, things like that. But I had no idea about like these sociological models.
Right, or the disease models, right?
Yeah. So that was like fascinating to me. And so then this morning I woke up at 3 a.m. and I was like, oh, I need to build a model. I need to build a model for myself because, okay, so I would love for you to help me like in this broadcast, like part of the show is like, can you help me construct a model like live? So the thing that I was thinking about, like, so ever since I was a child, I suffered from anxiety, like all throughout my life. And I've been to many different doctors, and there's all these different ways of how you can help treat and deal with anxiety. So I was like making a list, and I know one of your first rules for like building a model is naming the parts, right?
Yeah.
Right. So let me just read to you some of the parts that I wrote down.
Awesome. Okay.
I put down some of the parts to understanding and treating anxiety are things like exercise, right? There's like group exercise, or some people like myself, I like solo exercise, like yoga, like by myself. There's like meditation, right? There is obviously medication that can help reduce anxiety. There are things like therapy, like psychotherapy or exposure therapy. There are visualization techniques. There are things like simply talking to a trusted friend or a group that you trust about your anxiety issues. Some people find comfort in religion. Some people find discomfort in religion for dealing with anxiety. There's obviously biological factors, right? A chemical imbalance that can contribute things. Anyways, it goes on and on. I have like a full list, right? So you basically, as you begin to think about models to help make predictions or help to understand something better, after you begin to like assemble this list, what's like what are like the next steps?
So this one, I mean, it lends itself. One of the models I talk about in the book that people sort of don't know about are called Markov models. And one of my colleagues, John Holland, whenever you'd mention anything, he'd like say, think of that like a Markov model. Joke. But he was a famous scientist who, won a whole bunch of awards and used to hang out at Davos and stuff like that. And so Markov model works as this. There's a set of states. So in this case, the relevant states would be your mental states. Like, are you happy? Are you anxious? So we'd have to come up with like a categorization of set of states you might be in, right?
Okay.
And then what you'd do is you'd say, okay, now there's a set of like probabilities that you move from one state to another state. Like, so what's the probability if I'm in this anxious state that I become manic or that I become calm or something? So you have sort of 4 states, like totally calm, kind of mildly anxious, anxious, and then manic, let's say. So
Okay.
this is like, we'll call this like a CNAM model, for calm, mild. Right? So we got this CNAM model. Now we want to think, okay, if I don't do anything, what are the probabilities I move between these states, right? So if you had a lot of data on yourself, every day you just kept track, every hour you punched in, I'm calm, I'm mildly anxious, I'm anxious. You could actually then write down kind of the probabilities you move between these states. And in fact, this is kind of actually cutting edge research that people at Michigan and Harvard are doing. Used to be just at Michigan, but Harvard hired our person away. Monitors, and they just give you the state, right? It's like, I'm calm, I'm anxious. Then what you do is you sort of a baseline sense of what's the likelihood you move between these. And then from that, you can figure out, again, using really simple math, like if these are the probabilities, you should be calm 50% of the time, mildly anxious, let's say 30% of the time, anxious 20% of the time, and manic 10% of the time. That's just like if you don't do anything. Now what we can do is we can think of this like, okay, now it's a decision problem. When I'm mildly anxious, I've got a set of tools, yoga, meditation, right? Medicate, talking to friends. And so what you could do, and this is again with doing these, so a model like this, you'd do with like 1,000 people as opposed to just you, but you could also just do it with you. And you could say, okay, when I'm mildly anxious, if I do yoga, it used to be like without doing anything, I found I had a 50% chance of becoming calm and a 40% chance of becoming anxious and a 10% chance of kind of staying in that same state an hour later. But then you could say, if I do yoga, it turns out that now there's a 70% chance of getting calm, right? And so what you could do is like for each of these different, so now you've kind of got, you've got 7 tools and you've got, 4 states. And you want to think about, okay, which tool, when you're calm, you probably don't have to do anything, right? And the real sort of leverage point here is probably in the mildly anxious state, right? That's probably where all the action takes place. How do I increase the probability of moving back to calm and not towards
yes.
So then you experiment with these different things, right? And figure out which one works. And what people are doing, medical research are doing is they're giving people like these little, just apps on their phone, and they're asking them every hour, how do you feel? And then when you move from mildly anxious to anxious, they might then say, go get a cup of coffee with a friend, or you need to go to yoga class, or you need to, so if you had 2 mildly anxious states in a row, they then tell you, this is what'll work. And then you gather that data and you see what works. And it's, and the thing is that like, it's funny because you're kind of like modeling yourself, right?
Right.
But the thing is, we're really bad at knowing probabilities, and we're also really bad at figuring out what makes sense of things. So one example in the book I give is like, you can surf the internet or you can like do your homework. And if you surf the internet, like the tendency is to stay in that, oh, dude, let's just keep surfing the internet. And you don't get in the like mental state where like, I'm going to go study. But if you shut off the internet and start studying, you're more likely to get in sort of a virtuous loop, right? Where you're studying.
Yeah.
So, it's a simple model. Actually, it's funny because this is kind of it's funny you brought this up because this is absolutely state-of-the-art behavioral medicine. I mean, you are literally, the model you suggested is like at the absolute frontiers. Like one of my friends just won a Genius Award for doing this, right? I mean, like,
oh wow.
So you were late. You could have been Michael. You were so close. No, but think of it, because, and the thing is that here's where it's so cool though, right? Because you nailed this. Like there's a set of states, right? And there's a set of tools. And the only way you know which tool to use is in some sense by gathering the data, right? And now, and what's so awesome about your example is this, is that like the case I always tell to my students is, you don't want to chop down a tree with a hammer. You can do it. It's going to take a long time. It's going to be an ugly freaking mess, right? But here, it's not clear, what's the hammer, what's the saw, what's the tree, right? I mean, because you just got a set of tools, you've got a set of states, and so we have to use data to figure out which tool works. Somebody can tell a story about each one of those tools, but the data will help us sort it out. And the model gives us, and this is like the drumbeat throughout the book, kind of like the lattice or the infrastructure on which we can lay the data, right?
Yeah.
Super fun.
Yeah.
Yes. So the name, if you want the name, Susan Murphy,
Okay.
M-U-R-Y, used to be at Michigan, now she's at Harvard, but she's doing this. People walk around with sensors and saying,
Wow.
But there's a one problem with this. Like, if it turns out that like ice cream makes me better when I'm mildly anxious, I'm just going to be saying mildly anxious. That Susan's going to say, go get some ice cream, dude.
Go get some ice cream. No, I think that's brilliant. I think that's like really needed because it can help people be more self-aware. And I think that's kind of the concept of your book, right? Is like you need to be aware of the different models that are out there. You need to be aware of the gaps in those models. Like these are like one of your points is like you need to be hyper aware of these things because if you aren't aware, you can make flaws.
Right. That's right. No, and it's the nice thing that models have is they simplify and they're logically consistent, right? The world is so complex, it's so overwhelming that it's nice to have just sort of like clean lenses, right, that are to look through things and then have another one, right? Because I mean that's the paradox, right? The fundamental paradox in the book, and that's why it has that beautiful sort of like candy cane 5 lifesaver spine, right, to show all the different kind of rainbow colors. Is that you have to look through a lot of prisms, right? You've got to my previous work had been primarily on diversity, right? And I see this really as a diversity book, but it's a very kind of scientific, scientistic. I don't know exactly what word you use, but it's kind of coming at it that way.
Yeah, I actually I went on YouTube and I was watching your lecture about the importance of diversity.
Oh yeah,
in the workplace.
Yeah,
very, very powerful.
Thank you.
And I thought, I saw what a great transition to talk about the importance of diversity in the workforce, diversity of thinking, diversity of ethnicity, et cetera. And then how that lends itself into like this very niche topic of like, okay, diversity improves innovation and all these different things. But
Right.
now let's take it even deeper and say, okay, let's talk about diversity of like the way you're thinking about things.
Right. No, absolutely. I was doing a thing with some auto executives from Mexico the other day. It was funny. We were just throwing out ideas, and somebody had an idea that no one else had. And this person it was a woman who worked in safety, right? And it was just very clear she only had that idea because of the fact that like she worked in safety. It just didn't occur to other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's fun, right, to think that the world is. I was at Roper High School and middle school yesterday. You talk about scary. Go talk about math. And one of the things we were talking about is like they had the theme for Diversity Day was windows and mirrors, and so to try to play off that was to say the world is so high dimensional. You need so many mirrors. When you think of data, right? So in the book I talk about kind of like information, data, knowledge, that sort of stuff. Then data is a particular window, right? It's a particular, okay, let's look at what happened to unemployment, or let's look at how many people are obese, or let's look at how many people are suffering from opioid, addiction. That's just, those are, you're looking in a particular way at a problem. And to really get understanding, you've got to, in some sense, be looking through many windows. And what's so cool about this, I mean, this idea is to just explore is that people on the humanities side talk about this a lot. Right? Different perspectives, seeing things particular ways. And then, but yet people who are in, heavy into data science and finance are constantly thinking, okay, how do we filter this data? Which data do we use? And it's the same sort of question. It's just one's quantitative, one's more qualitative.
Yeah, I like I was actually watching several of your the Coursera program you teach.
Garage Band. That's like 8 years old.
I love that. I love it. But you talk about the fire hose of data that we get in. Like I work in social media, so I have all these tools to access social media data, like what people are saying about a certain topic, right? And so there's so much data coming in, and then we have to then structure it to make sense of it. And that's where like models come in, like sentiment models to help determine like, are what people saying about this topic, is it positive, negative, neutral? But that's like the only way to understand it, right?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Now you can use, I mean, what's funny is like the boundary between words. I mean, you've hit on a really fascinating point. The boundary between words and numbers is getting blurred, right? Because like now all these people send in reviews or all these people do something, and you can just take that and turn that into, are these, positive things, or they're negative things, right? The problem is though, it's still the case. Maybe you know this. I don't know this that well, but like with the semantic analysis, there's these interactions, right? So I can say chicken, which is good, and I can say popsicle, which is good. But if I say chicken popsicle, not so, right? No, and so it's hard to. So the parsing these things is still, I think we're still in early days. But you're right. I mean, I think that it's. I don't know whether to think of it as a. I actually got a lot of pushback on the fire hose analogy because a lot of people wrote back and said it's a giant hairball. But I don't have. They said, that's just a window I don't look through. But who knows?
Yeah, I think that speaks to like we get in the book is like the gaps, like when you're getting all this data and you start to build some models to help structure it and make sense of it. Like a simple example is like the sentiment data around a topic. Like the tools that we have right now are limited in the sense that it's going to pull in, it can't pull in every single word. That'd be too expensive, but it can pull in like the 20 words around it to help analyze. But what you're missing are like the conversations happening around that topic. So you can have, for example, I love Reddit. Like someone could post something on Reddit about a topic, and the algorithm would then look at it and go, okay, this post is about that topic. But then there's all these comments, like potentially thousands of comments about that topic that may or may not mention the topic. They're just responding or giving an emotional reaction to what's being said. But the algorithm is not going to pick up necessarily all that other content because the words that maybe I'm looking at aren't in those threads.
No, that's right. And it's also the case, I think, in these situations where it's sometimes like a topic. Like my wife was reading this just hilarious Twitter stream where someone was talking about having a, kind of not being able to think of the word, right? And said they couldn't think of pony, and so they said, "Oh, we saw this horse puppy." Right? And then the person,
that happens to me all the time. I can't think of the word.
Like right soon after, this guy's like, "Oh, I was in the store the other day, and I said I need a new pair of a leg shirt." There's just a whole stream of these things. But what I thought about, when you're bringing up this sentiment analysis, that like those things are all the same, right? But yet, if they'd have been just sort of, if you said, let me search the web to find all these things, that would be really sophisticated. You have to have a really sophisticated sort of engine to figure out what falls into the category, what stories that people put on Facebook or what stories that people tweeted that have this same flavor. Yet our brains can do it right away because once that stream comes in, right? No, and it is the case. Like I was having kebabs last night, and I was thinking, like, wow, this is like a chicken popsicle. Kebab. Give me one of those chicken popsicle, right? I think a chicken beef popsicle.
That is so funny. I love that Twitter example. Not when you don't know the word and you're just like trying to explain it. That is hilarious. So one of the other things one of the questions I had, Scott, because I don't come from the science world and I'm not aware of all these models, and one of the problems I run into all the time is, I get into trouble because I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
And so when it comes to like these models and like what I should be looking at when I'm trying to solve a business problem, like where do you go? Like where would I go to begin to like think through like, oh, there might be a solution, there might be a model out there that could help me sort through this, but I don't even know where to begin to look.
Right. So one of the, the main reason for writing this book actually came from the similar reason for writing a course is that, I'm from a place called Yankee Springs, Michigan. So like in Michigan, we do this, we hold up the hand, we point to where we're from, right? So I'm from a tiny place, and I came to the University of Michigan as an undergrad, and I remember going to the card catalog room. It was bigger than my town library.
Nice.
Like, whoa. Yeah. And then what they said was the professors were like, this is it. This is your moment. You have like 4 years to be around 15 million books. And, the rest of your life, you're going to maybe go to the mall and see a Walden's bookstore or something, right? And you really had the sense that here's where all the academic journals are. So it's really a world of information. And so then now I come back here as a professor 20 years later, and I'm thinking, what do I teach? Because everything's on your phone, essentially, right? And so I thought, okay, what will be really useful to teach will be these models, these will be frameworks to make sense of things. So what I try to do in the book, and in some sense, I'm just trying to, a long way of answering your question, is that what I try to do in the book in some sense is to say, here's like sort of a primer on like why modeling is important and how we use it. Here's a collection of models, and then here's why you want to use many models, talking about like inequality and opioids and stuff in the end. But so the book in some sense was meant to be like almost like a Crayola 32 box. And that's why I kind of like the color thing on the back. It looks like Lifesavers. Mm-hmm. It really is kind of like a starter set. And so it's not so much, I mean, and you're talking about this, like, you're handing it to your wife and stuff like that. It really is, it's not a novel. It's not necessarily a book to be read back to front. It's, you kind of read the beginning, look through at things you don't know that might interest you, maybe look at the end, and then have it on your shelf and just sort of think, occasionally pull it down. I think, but there's general classes of like, is this, am I looking for something that's kind of linear? Am I looking for a model that has feedbacks in it? Am I looking at a model that has to do with like sort of lack of information? Is it a diffusion model, right? And so what's cool is like, if you think like social media, you think this is like a disease. So one of the things I talk about in the book is like, analyze Justin Bieber like a disease, right? You might think of him as a disease, but it's he spread faster than like the measles sort of thing, right? And so I think one of the first things to do is just ask yourself one question. If I thought of a scientific metaphor for this, right? Or just even some sort of metaphor, this is like the spread of a disease, or this is like something going to an equilibrium, or, right? Then this is like particles in space following simple rules. This is like birds flocking. Then you can think, okay, this is kind of what I think it's like. Then go just type into Google model of this, right? And the amazing thing is if you type into Google, model of blank, you'll find, oh my God, there's too many academics. Somebody's already written it. What's typically nice is then they'll say, we've written a Markov decision model of this, right? That's what you'd have found if you'd have asked about this model of, mental states. And then be like, oh my God, what's a Markov prediction model? And then part of the reason for writing the book is that if you then go to Google and type in Markov decision problem, you're going to think, okay, first I've got to go get a PhD in mathematics. Right? And so part of the point of the book was to write something that bright people who read well and think well can say, I get it. I understand how this works. And then maybe you collaborate with someone who's an expert, right? So someone like yourself who's, involved in a media company doing important stuff, like you can hire someone who's the tech side, and the two of you have this interesting dialogue, and then the model informs what you do, and you inform what the model does. So it's I think the gap and what the book was hoping to fill was just trying to have like this sort of starter set. The models are all, there's a ton of them out there. It's amazing. It's totally amazing when they're out there.
I like how you talk about how your book is like you can kind of read through it, or you can like pick and choose. Like I'm very interested in this model. Right. But I think you're right. I think primer is good in the sense that it's like you're giving a good overview of all these very important models that you should be aware of. That way, when you come across something, you can go, oh, that's kind of like this. I should go do a deeper dive into that topic.
Yeah, so my sense is like, I tell people, you really should read the first 3 chapters pretty closely to just get, sort of just the gestalt of what I'm trying to accomplish, and then kind of pick and choose. One of my former PhD students was at a bookstore that was on the unput downable table next to like Omarosa's book or something like this. And I'm like, he's like, this is kind of unbelievable. And I said, well, clearly they haven't got to chapter 5 yet. As soon as you get to the entropy chapter, it gets pretty put down. So I think that, I think that it demands, this is the thing also I struggle with as a professor. I think this demands a lot, of the reader. It's as a
yes, it does.
Somebody, one of my other books, they said this is an airplane book, and I was kind of stunned, right? And there's a pause, and then she says, "If you're flying to Singapore."
That's good. That's good. Yeah.
Not Chicago, Detroit. It's not a Southwest airline book, It's
no doubt.
But I was actually thinking,
go ahead.
That could be like a rate number of airplanes on the book, like how many flights it takes to work through it.
That's good. No, it's seriously because I love books. I used to work at a bookstore when I was in college, so there are obviously books that are fun to read. You can read through them very quickly.
Right.
Like I loved like Anthony Bourdain's books on, when he writes about food. I could just I'm captivated. Like I can read through it, not put the book down.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's books that like yours where I call them meaty. Like it's like a steak, right? It takes time to cut through the steak, and it's not cereal. Like you have to cut through it,
Right.
cut into little bites sometimes, but then you enjoy it more because you really have to chew on it to really get the nutrition, right? And that's why your book is, because it takes time, but then the payback is so great because once the concepts hit, it's kind of like for me, it was mind blowing because like I said, I had no background in models other than I'd heard about, like I said, like financial models here and there. But because I was never in the maths or sciences, I always stayed away from it. But when I started to understand what you're getting at, and it took time, that's where I appreciated it so much, and that's where my mind started going crazy. Like, oh my gosh, I've never thought about that. I need to start to think through some of my own issues and try to model this stuff out.
I want to go back to, which I think you brought up at the beginning, and you wanted to construct your model. That was just, that was like a super happy moment for me for the following reasons. This is a podcast about data, right? And so one of the things that's happening a lot, there's so much data out there that people are, running it through. And I call this in the book kind of the big coefficient, in the sense that we're finding kind of what drives sales or what's giving a positive thing. So you're just sort of saying, let's look at the world as it is, and we can now measure it in ways we couldn't before, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a sense in which some of that is kind of model free in a way, right? And I call that in the book sort of like the big coefficient, find where the slope is steepest and climb that hill, right? So if changing the colors on your sweaters means more sales versus changing the knit, change the colors, right? But the issue you raised about I want this model of mental health, that's what I call in the book sort of the new reality, in the sense that when you put the model, much deeper interventions, right? Because data kind of only works backwards, right? It only looks.
That's right.
Once you sort of construct a model, then you can start doing experimentations in a weird sort of way. Then you push forward to think about, what data do I need? What data could I create to really make the world a better place, right? And so when you think one of my appointments is in political science, and there's obviously a lot going on at the moment, and we've got a lot of data, but I don't think it's a stretch to say that Rome is burning at the moment. It is not. Neither party is exactly doing a wonderful job. And I look at, I go visit, large corporations, universities, nonprofits, and there are some really incredible organizations with talented people doing amazing work. And I'm sure you find the same thing. I would not say that's true of many parts of our government. It may be talented people, but they're not doing amazing work. It's kind of a mess. If all we do is use that data to sort of describe the mess, we're really missing, in some sense, the opportunity that the data gives us, right? What we should be thinking about is, how do we construct institutions? How do we change laws? How do we change rules? How do we do things so that they work, right? So even we had a wonderful conference here in Michigan a couple weeks ago called Markets, Hierarchies, Democracies, Self-Organization, and Algorithms. And the idea
whoa.
So the idea is this, is if you want to make a decision or allocate things, you can have a market, you can have a democracy, you can have some bureaucracy, a hierarchy. You could just let her rip like we do with traffic. It's a total mess, right? Or now, increasingly, you can have algorithms, right? And so there's things like dating, which used to happen in a self-organized way, now kind of happens through algorithms, right? And there used to be a lot more firms, but now there's more spot market. So we call this thing the choice, because we, instead of passively letting what institutions we use just sort of occur, we can choose these things. And then how do we use models and data to make informed choices in this setting? And some of these conversations were so fascinating, because you think about driving, for instance, right? I used to live in LA. If you said, we're going to have a market for the roads in LA, you have to pay to get on the road, people would go crazy because it would be considered un-American.
Right.
But, okay, let's jump ahead 10 years. Suppose we have self-driving cars, and so you don't even own cars, and now you're just paying to get in a car. It's very Uber-y. it'll seem natural to pay for the route as well. Right? And that'll be the
right.
flow. And the thing is, that could be bad, right? Because it could mean that people have less income, can't afford to go anywhere. But it could also be good in the sense that, I mean, there's estimates that we lose billions and billions of dollars of people stuck in traffic, right? And it could be the money we raise from charging for these routes that we can provide much better public transportation or other forms that people can afford. So it's not clear what the implications are, but just like running data saying, here's how long the delays were, right? Probably isn't, and that's why, like, if you look at places like here, we have a Transportation Research Institute. Guess what they spend a lot of time doing? Building models. And sometimes those models, like we built a fake city here, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah, called M City. It's totally awesome. I mean, it's like, it's like self-driving cars all around. It's the old Willow.
Cool.
Yeah, super cool. And that's a model, right?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's fascinating. Well, I think it's so cool that, you're going to these conferences and meeting people from these different backgrounds, and then that just stimulates more ideas.
Right. No, it's fun. And like, but it's wild. Like I was at Canada Bell last week, and then I was at a middle school yesterday, right? So it's like, whoa, it's the middle school is tough. Like 20 minutes in, this kid raised his hand and he goes, I would just like to say, you're making a lot of sense here.
That is so cool. That is so cool. Well, Scott, I love how like you talk about diversity and diversity of models, but then like I love how you're very diverse in the way that you operate. Like you're going to academic conferences, you're going here and there, you're obviously in an academic institution, but then you're even going to a middle school. That's diversity. Like You're getting different perspectives. I'm
blessed to have these amazing opportunities. And even, opportunities like this are great because the thing is, I think often in the academy we're insulated from what's going on in business firms. And it's been really fun to go to, visit different businesses and have conversations like this where you think, how does someone like you react to my book, right? And I was joking with someone said, this book is done really well. What's next? And I said, well, I think there's just going to be a whole genre like the motel thinker, the Gödel thinker. We're doing it.
Yeah.
One letter. How many could do?
Yeah.
It's I think it's one of those things where the world now is, again, pulling on this complexity theme, so complex, and there's so much stuff going on, and it's so interesting that it's a challenge. Expertise in some sense comes from then knowing some small part of that. And I think one of the real gifts, unexpected gifts of studying models is I don't have to narrow, right? In some sense, I'm sort of collecting this set of hammers and screwdrivers and things that like allow me to talk to people who study disease, allow me to talk to people who study pop culture. Like we're talking about how now more things are done by groups because groups are better and technologies have allowed this. So I was going to talk to undergrads and I thought, God, I wonder what the data is on songwriting. So number one song is Ariana Grande's 7 Rings at the moment, right? Turns out that was written by 5 women. And do this because they can like just text each other lyrics and sing like, hey, how does this sound? And like, they can be in 5 different cities at the same time and like write a song. Whereas before, like McCartney had to be like pouring tea together in Liverpool or something. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And so as a result, I mean, I'm not going to say Ariana Grande is better than the Beatles because like I would get hate mail for. No, but I think you can get this just incredible, creativity through groups. And so it's not just, science, but it's also the arts and everything. Like, I mean, like the Academy Awards, like this best screenplay, those things are written by tons and tons of people. And it's better, right?
I think what also is great about diversity, and you point this out many times, is with diversity, you get varied opinions. You also get kickback, which can make things better. And I'm curious about your book, especially as you get into the many model thinking approach. Have you gotten any criticism or kickback on that, or things that you're? I'm curious.
So about a book that I wrote a year ago that just came out called the Diversity Bonus. The paperback just came out, which came out before the Model Thinker. And what happened is the Model Thinker is the book I've been working on for like a decade, right?
Oh wow!
And I stopped that to write this diversity bonus book as a favor to the Mellon Foundation, who's doing a series of books on diversity. And one of the things you talk a lot about is kind of like the success of a group depends on ability and diversity. And it's not, there's no trade-off. It's really both, right? If you're chopping down trees, or if you're running a relay race, then it's all ability, right? It's a very one-dimensional thing. But once it becomes higher dimensional and hard, they're the twin components. And research like by Brian Uzi and Ben Jones that have looked at a lot of Adamic, that have looked at every paper ever published, every patent ever issued. What just falls out of that is you need talent and diversity, right? But there's a catch in that people who have been successful tend to think of themselves as talented because they are, right? And so that causes them to think it's all about talent. So it's very difficult to go talk to a bunch of doctors, all of whom got great grades in high school, got great grades in college, scored well on standardized tests, went, these are high achieving people. And so they tend to see a balance that, that like, no, you got a choice. You can be diverse or you can be good, right? So there's pushback in that, in that way. And there's also pushback from the other side in that there's a set of people who feel as though, and I have sensitivity to this position as well, but like, we shouldn't be so pragmatic, that the reason that we should push diversity is because it's the right thing to do. Normatively, we need to be an inclusive society, right? And it doesn't matter if profits are higher. It doesn't matter if scientific research is higher. Inclusivity itself is the goal, right? And so, and I think the way I try and position myself is I say, I'm just trying to come at this in some sense scientifically, and I'm trying to ask questions, and I'm trying to just explore this, and I'm trying to, and I think shedding light helps. But it does mean, people feel as though, my sort of more functionalist, pragmatic approach could possibly undermine the normative argument. And they'll sort of say, well, what if the data doesn't support it? Then there's no reason for inclusivity, right? And I think that, in my sort of counter argument would be that, maybe for chopping down trees, the data probably won't support it. For solving the obesity epidemic, or figuring out American politics, it clearly will support it, right? And so the thing is, but if we need inclusivity to solve the hard problems, right, and the complex problems, and the problems that including one of those problems being how do we get along, then this has got to be part of our repertoire as, modern human beings, which is working well in diverse groups. And so inclusivity sort of comes along. But again, that's more of a normative view. And I think part of that, I'll be honest, I think part of that is because, I grew up not poor, but, certainly probably like lower middle class in the rural area. And so, I think it's easy if you're ensconced in university as a professor to talk about, the inclusivity. But people, we do have to protect the environment. We do have to eat. We do have to live meaningful lives and create art and culture. And those things are going to depend on, I think, diverse, talented groups of people, right?
Yeah, no, that's right. And, it's funny you talk about this because we just had our, we have executive resource groups here at Experian, which all celebrate different cultures, different types of groups. And something I'm very proud of here at Experian, we have a great Pride group, Asian American group, African American group, and something that our leadership top down has said that diversity is key for innovation.
Right.
And the data for us is telling the story. The more inclusive, the more diverse, the better our ideas. Right. And I think about even things like with the way that you hire, right? There's algorithms that sort through resumes, right? And one of the problems that I've read about at certain organizations is that if your culture, for whatever reason, isn't diverse, for instance, you tend to lean towards your alma mater. You tend to hire people from your college, right? Now, no doubt, the people from that college might be diverse ethnically,
right,
but the fact that they're all coming from the same institution can be limited, right? And so it's so important, your talent pool that you're bringing in, it can't just be your college. It can't just be people that have your value system. It's important to bring in people from different perspectives. That adds creativity. That adds great insight and great discussion.
No, a couple years ago. No, you're so smart. I was at a thing where they did that MOOC, the Coursera course, right? So Michigan was having a meeting of all the engineering deans from like the top 15 engineering schools, which is essentially like kind of like the Big Ten plus Stanford, MIT, Princeton, Georgia Tech, Rice, right? So I'm sitting in there and I'm with all the educational deans from these colleges, and I'd have been willing to bet almost any amount of money that I could have matched the deans to the college perfectly just by the color of their shirt. Like the Wisconsin guys wrote but they just look. You could have they just looked like someone from Georgia Tech. They just looked
looked
like, and you realize like there's a famous David Foster Wallace graduation speech where there's the two goldfish swimming in the water. Do you know this story?
No.
Two goldfish swimming in the water, and an older goldfish comes up and goes, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" They're kind of confused. He swims off, and then the one says to the others, "What the hell is water?" And I think you just nailed like every one of these colleges, every organization you've probably ever been in has water, right? It's this culture thing, right? And so,
right.
And so we tend to be more comfortable around people who've grown up in the same water, lived in the same water, went to college in the same water. But hanging out with people who've been from different water challenges us, right?
Yeah.
But it's also difficult for people to swim in water different than the one they've, kind of grown up in. But no, you're absolutely right. And I think that I actually wrote a piece for Harvard Business Review a month ago about this use of, people use algorithms and then they use people, and maybe you should use more than one algorithm, just like you use more than one.
That's right. No, that's so right. That's so right. I think obviously diversity is super important, and you read a whole book about that. And I see it here. I see it here at Experian about the push for more diversity, more diverse thinking. And you get that by having people from different backgrounds. Like that's how it happens. Like you have to have different perspectives.
Right.
Like you said, like I grew up in a lower income home. Like you have people from upper income, like all that, it's all different perspectives. Diversity is not just ethnicity. And you point that out.
Yeah. And it's funny, but what's so cool. And what I'm trying to explore and just have fun with is that, so when you're saying, you want these different perspectives, in some sense, then you can think like, whoa, it's this fun little slide down a hill to say, and those are like different models, right? And so we're talking about this before, how like the model book really is this kind of diversity book in a kind of formal way. And what's been, I think, really rewarding for me in this whole process is having people, who are maybe trained as engineers or scientists or mathematicians who say to me, people have always said to me, oh, we value diverse perspectives, and I just didn't get it, right? I mean, it like it was a political statement. And yet in my work, I use Cartesian coordinates like X and Y, and then I use polar with angles, and those are different perspectives, aren't they? I'm like, yeah, they're different, and then you start seeing, and I think it's a very small step from there to have a meeting with someone, have them say something you don't understand. And instead of thinking, they don't understand this problem, thinking, wait a minute, they understand this problem differently, and there's something to be gained from that, right? I mean, that's move the world, right?
Yeah. Something that you just said, talking about how maybe, obviously this book gets into the importance of many models and diversity of thinking, but also you just mentioned about maybe we need to have different types of algorithms, different types of AIs that are sorting through things. And it's funny you said that because I had a data talk a while back, and the data scientist Amin was talking about how he is bringing in algorithms from different social sciences into other areas. So for example, he was talking about how to improve e-commerce algorithms. When we go to Amazon.com, do shopping, and he was infusing genetic algorithms, right? Things that like learn and evolve and grow and adapt, right? To make things better.
Who is this?
His name was, I'll send you his information.
Yeah, okay,
but you'd be fascinated. He's fascinating. But cool. It's like this whole idea of like what you're getting at is like the many models, different types of thinking. Like that's how we improve things. So he's taking like, in e-commerce, we have like these product recommendation algorithms, and this is how they work. But how can we improve upon it? He's like, he has like a, biology background. Right. And it's like, in genetics, like things grow and evolve, and let's take this like evolutionary theory and let's take this and let's bring this over to e-commerce, because he's talking about how like as we get older, our things that we need change, and
Right.
engines and AIs need to adapt. And like, oh, it looks like we can probably guess that the children are out of the house now. I don't need to recommend baby products anymore, right? And so like these recommendation engines for products are taking things from other models to adapt.
Right. But then eventually the food will get soft again and you get louder.
That's right. That's right.
Actually, it's funny you should bring up genetic. So the guy John Holland I talked about before, who would say it's a Markov process. He's his great academic fame came from. He's the person who developed these genetic algorithms. He's the inventor.
Oh,
yeah, a long time ago. Which is and he just passed away a couple years ago. But he's a fabulous, just a fabulous person, and just someone who loved ideas. And so I used to come to work and see him every day, and it was spectacular. It was like just a gift.
That is awesome. I want to remind everybody, the book is called The Model Thinker by Dr. Scott E. Page. I have a URL that will actually go to Dr. Page's profile on the University of Michigan's website, so you can learn more about him, his work, his previous books, the papers that he's writing. The short URL is just ex.pn/modelthinker, and that'll just redirect over to Scott's page. Obviously, you can also just Google The Model Thinker to find his book, or just Google Scott E. Page, and you'll get his page that way as well. Dr. Page, thank you so much for your time. This has been just a great discussion. I loved learning about you, your book, how practical it is, and thankful for you just for like creating a book to kind of put all these very complex models and systems into one place to be a resource for someone like me who was clueless about all this stuff. And like, here it is all packaged up, and it takes time to work through, but extremely valuable, and grateful for your book.
Thank you so much. And it's a little bit funny that the Amazon just took off one of the reviews of my book was Ax9 Instapot review. I think that was really confusing. I was like, wow, this book is really complicated because it doesn't work well with sticky rice or something. But
that's funny.
It is. No, just to end on this, one of the things that's been this conversation is really useful is that we've been trying to understand like who's buying the book and what markets is it tapping into, because it's been like the #1 ranked bestseller in baseball statistics, retirement planning, and economic theory. And you're like, what? And this conversation with you has kind of helped me understand part of that, right? And I think that there is just this appetite for deep, everybody has data, whether you're doing baseball, retirement planning, or economics. And, and if the book helps in any way, that's fantastic. And thanks for this opportunity, and best of luck with all you do.
Oh, before you go, have you ever thought about doing a children's book on this? Because I'm serious. I'm totally serious, breaking it down for kids.
No, I thought, my younger son is going to art school. And so once we get, once I get him through that, I want to work on some projects with him, either where we do some sort of video interactive game sort of thing, or, children's books or something of that sort.
Yeah.
I think, I'd love to tap into junior high kids, high school kids. I think that when you say math to them, they think cosine, secant, arctangent. They don't think, wow, I can, model the spread of pop songs or the colors of iPhones, or, why, like I just was reviewing some proposals on like, how do you help the million people that go to Mecca not stampede each other, right? So you create these little models. Super cool, right? And kids would love to do that, but they don't think that that's what math is about. They think math is, geometry and calculus. So I think that, so it's a place, as I mature in my ability to communicate, it's a place I'd like to go. I think it's not as hard to communicate to people with PhDs because they're really smart and they're willing to work through hard stuff. It gets harder to communicate to a general audience, and it's even harder to communicate to children. So it's a place I'd like to go, but I think there's still some skills I need to learn.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Page. And let's definitely stay in touch. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Awesome. Talk to you soon. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.